I think one thing that people don't realize, and one thing that makes me very hopeful about the future of the Inflation Reduction Act, is that at least three of the top five states for that are deploying solar are actually very Republican. A lot of the places that have gotten benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act are actually Republican led. And there are some Republican lawmakers that have signed a petition. They were basically saying that we're seeing a lot of benefit in our districts, and if we were to repeal this now, we would have spent billions of dollars for nothing. It's more complicated than red versus blue. I think solar makes sense for everyone. There's a lot of very Republican leaning people who go solar because you save money and you have independence. So it's a lot easier to deploy in like a rural area. So there's a lot of hope. And just because we have a new president who historically hasn't loved clean energy doesn't mean that the whole thing is going to disappear. I
Hmm.
think that's important to keep in mind.
Welcome to this episode, which is the first episode of this brand new podcast, Green Tech Pulse, which aims to be your one go-to for everything green tech. Today, we'll be talking policy. We are recording in November, and just maybe 2, 3 weeks ago, the US had their elections, and Donald Trump won the elections. A lot of people have been wondering what this means for green tech, what this means for the future of green tech, the policies and everything. And today I'll be discussing that with our guests. Our guest today is Aaron Nichols. Aaron Nichols is from Exact Solar. He's a NABCEP certified professional and policy expert, and he will discuss this with me. Like I said, I'm the learner here. I'm going to learn from the guests. So you're going to be learning with me too. So
Yeah,
welcome to Green Tech Pulse, Aaron.
thank you. Yeah, it is a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited to be able to have this conversation and excited to talk to your audience.
Thank you so much. So now, like I mentioned before, Donald Trump won the election about 3 weeks ago. By the time this is out, he should have been sworn in. So now, thinking about this election victory, thinking about his policies and different things, what's your take on his win for the future of green tech?
So I can really specifically only speak about solar. I work for a solar company. I'm currently researching an article on this topic right now. Um, but there are a couple things that we could see. The solar doesn't seem to be in as much danger as, say, wind power might be. But once again, I'm not a wind power expert. I work in the world of solar. And there are a couple things that we could see that might happen. The Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed 2 years ago and has boosted the deployment of clean energy all across the country. While we are likely not going to see a full repeal of it, there's a good chance that now that there are more Republican lawmakers at play, that we are going to see certain pieces of it repealed. And if that happens, solar could be slowed down. Now, in the short term, after his election, after he was reelected, we are seeing quite a lot of people who are actually rushing to get projects done. There's definitely been a temporary boom of people who are rushing to close solar projects while the incentives are still at play.
Hmm, interesting. So I think the biggest impacts you think would be for the incentives.
Hmm.
Yes, but do you think the
Yeah.
solar industry will continue to grow despite these incentives, even though parts of the act are repealed or anything?
I do. And the reason that I feel very optimistic about that is because the solar industry has continued to grow despite incentives for a long time. And we are now seeing that solar is the cheapest power source out there. The US has deployed more solar than any other power source for 2 years running. And that partly was to do with the Inflation Reduction Act. And as I said, if incentives are repealed, that could slow that down, but it's now cheaper than anything. And solar is easy. You can put it anywhere. It's a lot less regulation to put solar out than it is to put wind power out.
Yes, and I think I agree with you on that. Like we were discussing before we started recording, the power powering this right now is solar. I set it up 3 years ago, and making the decision to set it up, moving from the UK to my home country, that's Nigeria, where I am. We have power cuts once in a while, and the other option is getting a petrol generator, which is really noisy. And these
Right.
days, really expensive. So, but getting a solar, this thing, I think it cost me about 5 or 6 times, if I am not mistaken, 5 or 6 times what it would have cost me to get a generator. But the thing is that here we are having our call. It's totally quiet. I haven't spent a
Hmm.
dollar in the last 3 years on this
Yeah.
installation. Yeah, and it's just
Yeah.
anytime I want to, I don't need to go out and maybe look for petrol or anything. I just switch on and I switch off. I
Mhm.
think the only thing that went bad was my inverter, which I've changed. Yeah, okay, I remember I changed my inverter, but apart from that, everything has just been how I set it up, and it's like lithium
Yeah.
batteries, so it's forever. It's almost forever compared to. So I think I agree with you. It's much cheaper. It's much cheaper. Yes, over time to replace it is going to be expensive, but it's cheaper. It's
Yeah.
convenient. It's peaceful. It's
And this is
peaceful
what I'm
too.
always telling people. Solar is a very unfussy technology. It just sits there and it produces power. And it's very
Yeah.
uncomplicated. There are no moving pieces. There's nothing that's going to wear out. It just sits in the sun and you can deploy it anywhere. I mean, I'm looking out my window right now and in my driveway I have a Toyota Tacoma. I live in Colorado, so I spend a lot of
Oh,
time in the mountains. And I use my four-wheel drive to go to the mountains. And then I have a solar panel. I have a 200-watt solar panel and a battery bank that I got off Amazon. And that powers a Starlink. And because I work remotely, I can go work from the woods,
wow.
all because of the power of solar.
Wow. Wow. So now
Yeah.
looking at looking at the solar industry, I think Trump left in 2020 and this is 2024. Apart from the Inflation Reduction Act, which gave those incentives and made it cheaper to deploy solar, how has the solar industry evolved from 2020 to 2024? So we can see,
How has it changed?
yeah, how has it changed from 2020 to 2024 till
I
today?
mean, it's absolutely been in a boom. The residential sector has always been a bit of a more of a roller coaster, but because of the Inflation Reduction Act, the commercial projects and the utility scale solar we've seen deployed more than ever before. And yeah, in 2023, residential solar slowed down a little bit, and that was mostly because of interest rates going up, and that has very little to do with the president. But interest rates were up because inflation was up, and so the Fed was keeping them high. And because of that, a lot of people didn't want to borrow money at higher prices to finance solar projects. So that's one of the things that slowed it down in the end of 2023 into 2024, but we're expecting 2025 to be a great year for residential installers.
Hmm. Okay, so now I think the Inflation Reduction Act is a federal law, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
So let's say part of these are repealed. Are there any state level policies, maybe in the different states, that can maybe provide a buffer against any changes at the federal level?
Yeah, and that varies very much state to state. Actually, a really good example is so the company I work for, Exact Solar, is in Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
And Pennsylvania and New Jersey have very different levels of solar deployment, and it's because of the state level incentives and policies. So Pennsylvania, in I believe it was 2004 or 2005, they put out legislation called the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard. And New Jersey also has one. Theirs is called the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard. It's a really slight difference in wording, but it actually means a lot. Pennsylvania's portfolio allows non-renewable non-renewable energy sources to be included in that portfolio, and New Jersey's does not. Pennsylvania, in the original document, they shot for 8% alternative power by 2021, and they met that target and they have not updated it. Whereas when you look at somewhere like New Jersey, I believe it was 1999, they started their renewable energy portfolio standard. They shot for a certain small percentage and then they updated it and they updated it. And they're now shooting for, I believe, 50% renewables by 2035. So the amount of renewables that a state is shooting for has a lot to do with it, because that means that more solar will be deployed. And then when you're talking about state level incentives, Pennsylvania and New Jersey both have something called SRECs, which are solar renewable energy credits. And in Pennsylvania, those are worth less than they are in New Jersey. So when you are selling a solar system to someone in Pennsylvania, you say you're going to get these credits and they're going to help you pay for your system, but your system's going to pay for itself in, let's say, 7 years. And then you are over in New Jersey, and just because of that one incentive, the system's going to pay for itself in 5 years. Well, someone in New Jersey is more likely to get a system like that.
Hmm.
So, yes, there are state level incentives, and they do vary state to state. Because, I mean, yeah, the US is basically like 50 different small countries.
Yeah, I think the true federation when you look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so now we've talked about policy, federal level policy and state level policy. So beyond politics, beyond policy, what economic factors? I know you mentioned interest rates earlier, slowing down
hmm
solar installation. So what other economic factors would you say are driving the growth or let's say decline of
hmm
solar installations?
Yeah, I mean, there's interest rates, like I mentioned before. One thing that we could see in Trump's second term is tariffs,
Hmm.
and that probably won't affect solar components as much as it will affect batteries. And that just it's just because a lot more batteries are made in China than solar components are. A
Yeah.
lot of solar components are made in China, but they're also made in Southeast Asia. And it depends on where he would decide to put tariffs. But we are expecting to see the price of batteries go up more than we're expecting to see the price of solar components go up, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. So now, I think one other thing too we've noticed in the past few years is businesses having sustainability commitments, sustainability policies within the
Mhm.
business, trying to produce more sustainably, to switch to green energy and things like that. So, how have these sustainability commitments by businesses changed or influenced the growth of solar?
It totally depends on the business, and that's something that I don't know a lot about, but I think we have seen companies like Facebook, Amazon, and the major tech players in Silicon Valley, they need a lot more power now because they're investing in data centers to power um, AI.
Yeah.
And so they are investing not only in solar, but also in nuclear projects, and different types of energy all across the board. I think, yeah, it depends company to company whether the sustainability pledge is all talk and whether it's people talking and posturing or whether it's actually action. But in terms of which companies are doing what, that's not something that I am really qualified to speak a lot on.
Yeah, okay. So now, I think going back to the economic part again, one of the turnoffs, because I know I mentioned I set up my solar installation 3 years ago. That was late 2021, but I was
Mhm.
supposed to do this like maybe 8 years ago. And the main the main turn off to me was the cost because it was
Hmm.
looking at the cost of a generator and fuel and the cost of a solar installation, the cost just wasn't something else. But I've noticed over time the cost of everything has really dropped because even with inflation, you see the cost of panels per watt dropping, the cost of the
Right.
batteries dropping and everything. So now, can you break down the cost of a solar installation, let's say maybe 8 years ago, and
Mhm.
now how have they changed and how have they changed?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with manufacturers just getting more efficient and better at building panels, and components. I mean, and also inverters. Before you had kind of bulky string inverters that were a little bit less efficient. Now you have micro inverters that sit behind each panel, and those can be a bit more affordable. Solar panels, just the panels themselves just keep getting cheaper, and more efficient. We just keep getting better at making them. And luckily, they are mostly made of silicone wafers. Silicone is an abundant material, and yeah, we just keep getting better at making it cheaply.
Yeah. Yes, I think so looking forward, I think would you say maybe tariffs aside, would you say these things will get cheaper, much cheaper? Is there a bottom for them
Mhm.
or yeah.
You know, this is one of those funny things where I think it's hard to make predictions because you don't really know what's coming. I think every time thought leaders try to make predictions about things like this, they end up being wrong, and it's the answer is something that no one saw coming. Do you know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, things get more efficient, they get smaller, they get like everyone thinks that we've reached the upper limit of efficiency, and then 5 years later, we're doing it in a completely different way. So it's really hard to say what's coming. And I'm not sure if they'll get cheaper. I sure hope so because it's already the cheapest power source. So to see it get cheaper and to just see us deploy more and more across the country would make me really happy.
Hmm. Okay. So now I think next thing I'll ask about is you mentioned earlier that you've noticed a lot of homeowners rushing to start to install solar at least before the next administration comes in.
Hmm.
So what would you say homeowners should know about going solar? I know you've mentioned it's the cheapest source, and even
Right.
without the act and everything is still it's still going to be cheap. So what would you say homeowners should know about going solar
Yeah,
today?
I think this is a very simple equation. Inflation is driving power costs up. The
Up.
price of installing solar is going down. Interest rates are going up. So it becomes more and more. Oh, and yeah, incentives are already at an all-time high and may go
Hmm.
down. So it's just we might be in the best situation to install solar that we will be for the next 4 years. And we're not sure. We're not sure what's going to come, but the day you install solar is the day you never have to pay a more expensive rate for power. I said never. I mean, maybe for 25 to 30 years, because the power company is going to keep raising their prices, but you can actually opt out of that by buying a solar system. You don't have to pay more for power every year. You can just pay the same rate for power or almost nothing for power for 25 to 30 years. So yeah, I think people should know that the incentives are at an all-time high, installation costs are low and keep getting lower, and power is only going to get more expensive.
Yeah, and I think like you said, the day you finally install solar is the day you turn to an evangelist for solar too. Because I mentioned earlier that I was reluctant installing it, but once I just shelled out, I have like a three
Hmm.
kilowatt units here.
Yeah.
Once I did it, funny enough, everybody around me that listens has solar right now in the last three
Yeah,
years.
dude, and that's exactly how it always happens. It's like people will say, "Oh, I don't want to be the first one in my neighborhood," but then someone has to be the first, and as soon as they are, everybody else starts doing it.
Yes, yes. So now, apart from the cost, there are a couple of things. I'm sure you've been in the industry for a while, so you've encountered a couple of reasons why people say they don't want to install solar. For me, it was the cost compared to the alternatives. So for you, what are those things, those different things you've seen that people say are the reasons they don't want to install solar, which you know are wrong?
There's a lot of them. I actually just wrote a list of 51 of them, but I can't remember them off the top of my head. But it ranges from, it ranges from really logical reasons, like I think I'm going to sell my house next year.
Mm.
Um, and so, I think I'm going to sell my house next year, and I don't know if I'll get paid back for the system. Now, sometimes if you install a solar system and you pay for it out of pocket, your home value actually goes way up, but that's not something that you can guarantee, right? Um, that's a very logical reason. I also see things like certain people believe that solar systems attract lightning, which is completely untrue. Certain people believe, because of misinformation they've heard, people believe that solar systems are loud. I mean, we started the conversation, you were talking about how quiet yours is. There's no moving parts to it. I'm trying to think of some of the other great ones I heard. Oh yeah, a lot of people are worried about detaching from the grid,
Mm.
which is not what actually happens unless you live in a cabin in the mountains, and then you're not attached to the grid anyway. Um, and yeah, some people want to make sure that they have power during outages, and when they find out that they have to get batteries for that, a lot of people will, not like the cost as much, and they won't invest in the system. So there's a lot of reasons people don't go solar.
Yeah. Okay, so I think one other thing I would like to ask is one issue we've all had, I know in the US, everywhere I've been, is that the power grids are typically very old. Some of them up to a century,
Hmm.
50 years and above, and most of them are outdated. And you have a couple of governments and co trying to modernize their grids. So in this grid modernization efforts, what role have you seen solar play? How have you really seen people, seen maybe governments or municipalities or whatever installing large scale solar as part of their grid?
Yeah. Yeah, we're starting to see, once again, because it's the cheapest power source, we're starting to see utilities installing large utility scale, and then they can use that power during off times. Um, but yeah, I mean, like you said, a lot of the infrastructure is very old and needs to be updated. And that's another reason power costs keep going up, is because utilities keep having to ask to raise their rates. Because utilities can't just raise their rates, they have to ask local governments, but they keep saying, we need to update this infrastructure, so we need to keep raising the rates for power. Um, so yeah, I think utilities are leaning into it more and more. A lot of utilities don't like solar for obvious reasons. That's not true across the board. But we are seeing more and more utilities installing utility scale solar and using it to make the grid more reliable.
Hmm. Okay, so now earlier when we were talking about cost, you talked about the improvements in efficiency and technology driving down cost of solar. So if you look at the technology landscape now and the different things we have, what emerging technologies as at today would you see maybe going a bit forward, further driving down the cost of solar components?
Mm. I don't know if it would drive down the cost of solar components, but there's one that I'm really interested in. And once again, I don't know if this is going to be a novelty or if it's going to be deployed at a wide scale. You never know until something hits the market, but there's a technology called bidirectional charging that
Hmm.
we wrote an article about on Exact's website last year. And what it is you can let your electric vehicle the battery of your electric vehicle can serve as the battery backup for your house during a power outage.
Hmm.
So when your car is plugged in, so you have your solar system charging your house, and then when the car is plugged in, if the power goes out, the car can actually feed power back into your home and power it for up to 2 days, depending on the size of the house.
Wow.
So that's a technology that, like I said, I don't know if it'll be a novelty. I don't know if it will certainly reduce the price if you're someone who wants to electrify your home. You have an EV and you don't need to get batteries, but you'll still be able to have power when the power goes out.
Hmm. That's interesting. I think I haven't heard of that, and I'll probably research a bit on that too, because these EVs usually have really huge batteries.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
and a lot
Yeah,
of them
a
are
lot of
driven.
people don't realize how much power it takes to power a car. And that's
Yeah.
why we don't have solar powered cars because you need not quite as much energy as you need to power a house, but it's close just in terms of like to push an automobile. They're very heavy. And so the amount of solar you would need is much bigger than the surface area of the car.
So
Yeah.
you probably have a really huge canopy above
Yeah.
the car.
Yeah, you would have to have a gigantic canopy.
Yeah, okay. So as we get to the end of this episode, when you look at policy developments or probably proposed policies going forward, what developments would you say or would you think consumers should watch out for in the next few years, policy-wise
Yeah.
especially?
Yeah, there's a real possibility. So right now, under the Inflation Reduction Act, if you invest in a clean energy project, if you invest in solar, you're able to claim 30% of your costs back as a tax credit on your taxes the following year. There's a possibility that that tax credit is going to be reduced, that it might be phased out early. So that is something that we might see. Another thing is the Inflation Reduction Act included a provision for domestic manufacturing. So it's a 10% bonus credit. If you build a commercial scale project with
Mhm.
solar or clean energy, or sorry, solar or wind energy in the US, you, as long as you can prove that you've used a certain percentage of components that were manufactured in the US, you get an extra 10% credit on top of the 30% that you already got.
Wow.
Um, and that has still not been fully figured out. The US doesn't totally have the capacity to manufacture at the scale that we need for the solar projects that we're building. And one of the things that we've heard, and this is unfounded, this is just something that we've heard talk of, um, but it's possible that lawmakers could make it so that in order to get any tax credits, you would have to prove that you had used like not entirely domestic content, but a certain percentage of domestically manufactured content in a solar project.
Hmm.
So if that were the case, that would be pretty bad for the solar industry in the short term and the medium term. Long term, it would probably be good for American manufacturing, but it would definitely make things more complicated. So once again, I think if you're on the fence about solar, now is the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So as we get to the end of this too, is there anything that you like to leave with the audience about what we've discussed? Maybe something I haven't asked any questions on and you feel will be important or interesting?
I think one thing that people don't realize, and one thing that makes me very hopeful about the future of the Inflation Reduction Act, is that at least three of the top five states for that are deploying solar are actually very Republican
Hmm.
led, very right leaning. That would be Texas, Georgia, and Arizona.
Hmm.
So a lot of the places that have gotten benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act are actually Republican led. And there are some Republican lawmakers that have signed a petition. I can't remember who they sent it to off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but they were basically saying that we're seeing a lot of benefit in our districts, and if we were to repeal this now, we would have spent billions of dollars for nothing. Um, so it's it's more complicated than red versus blue. I think solar makes sense for everyone, and that's something that we talk about a lot at Exact Solar is I think when a solar company is only doing the let's save the earth kind of marketing, they
Mm,
miss the kind of people who would get solar for different reasons.
mm,
There's a lot of very Republican leaning people who go solar because you save money and you have independence. So it's a lot easier to deploy in like a rural area. So there's a lot of hope. And just because we have a new president who historically hasn't loved clean energy doesn't mean that the whole thing is going to disappear. I think
mm.
that's important to keep in mind.
Amazing. Amazing. So I think I've really enjoyed this episode. I've learned a lot from this episode too, from talking with you. So for listeners who probably this discussion wasn't enough for them, they need to know more, they need to learn more, and they want to connect with you and learn from you or anything else. What's the best way they can reach you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very approachable and I love talking to people in the solar industry. And look at Exact Solar's website and blog. I wrote all of the blog content. Me and the marketing director have spent a lot of effort to make sure that we have very good resources for homeowners and business owners. And we've put a lot of effort and attention into making sure that, yeah, we just have a great free educational resource for anyone who wants to know more about solar.
Hmm. Amazing. So, LinkedIn, your LinkedIn link would be on the screen in the show notes and also the link to the blog on the Exact Solar website. So, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I know it's so late. It's almost 11 p.m., I'm sure, for you right now.
Yeah, I'm going straight to sleep. But yeah, thank you for having me on, man. This has been great.
Thank you. And for the listeners, I hope you enjoyed this and subscribe. So for the next episode next week. Bye
Yeah,
for now.
definitely subscribe since I'm the first episode.
All right.
Yeah.